the endless road. Being a truck driver was never easy, but in some way, the solitude of the road always brought me peace. The darkness of night, the steady hum of the engine, the asphalt stretching under the wheels, it was all part of a routine I knew well. It felt like the road and I had an unspoken partnership. Or so I thought until that night. I was on a last-minute delivery, the kind of long, lonely trip most avoided. The road was nearly empty, surrounded by miles of nothing. I'd driven this highway before, but tonight there was something different. Clouds covered the moon, casting everything in complete darkness. Only the headlights lit the way, as if I were driving through a tunnel of shadows. Hours passed without stopping, with the radio off, listening only to the engine. The clock on the dashboard read nearly midnight when I passed a road sign. I caught a glimpse of the word rest before moving on. But 40 minutes later, I passed the same sign again, the same word, same place. Maybe it was a coincidence, but a sense of unease started growing inside me. The road was straight, no turns. How could I have passed the same point twice? I kept driving, watching every detail. When I passed the same sign a third time, I decided to stop. I pulled over and turned off the engine. I checked the map and GPS, but everything said I was on the right road. I tried to ignore the panic creeping in, but I knew something was wrong. I got back on the road, trying to stay calm. I looked in the rearview mirror, and for a second, I thought I saw something moving in the darkness behind me. A fleeting shadow, fast enough to make my heart race. I kept going, eyes fixed ahead. Again, I passed the same sign. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, like I was driving into nowhere. My heart pounded in my chest. None of this made sense. It was as if time itself had trapped me in a loop with no escape. I glanced in the mirror again, and this time, I saw it clearly. Something was following me. A dark shadow moving among the trees, lining the road, keeping pace with the truck, but never getting close enough for me to make out what it was. It seemed impossible, but deep down I knew something was watching me. I sped up, trying to escape the growing terror. The engine roared as the truck barreled down the road, but the faster I went, the closer the shadow seemed. Then the radio, which had been off for hours, turned on by itself. A crackling static filled the cab, chilling me to the bone. Amid the noise, I heard a faint voice, almost a whisper. "You'll never leave here?" I looked around frantically, but the only thing there was that voice, repeating in an icy tone. The shadow alongside the truck seemed to expand, stretching like a dark cloud, formless but unmistakably present. The voice on the radio grew louder, stronger, repeating like an unavoidable sentence, "You'll never leave here." My fingers gripped the wheel as fear overwhelmed me. Ahead on the road, something even more disturbing appeared. A hooded figure standing in the middle of the road, motionless. Its eyes gleamed like embers fixed on me. I tried to swerve, but it was too late. The truck should have collided with the figure, but at the instant of impact, it vanished like a mirage. Yet the terror remained. The radio crackled again, and now the voice sounded like a command, "You'll never leave here." The road seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, like I was trapped in an eternal cycle, doomed to drive through a tunnel of endless darkness. My eyes were fixed on the horizon, but there was no horizon. Only darkness, emptiness. The last thing I remember before everything faded was the sensation of being swallowed by the road itself, and how the road and darkness had become one. When I opened my eyes, I was back on the road, facing the same sign, as if I had never left. The invisible passenger. Driving at night had never been a problem for me. In fact, I preferred night trips. The traffic was lighter, the silence helped me focus, and the steady hum of the truck's engine was almost hypnotic. But that night, things were different. The road seemed more deserted than usual. No vehicles passed by, which was odd even on that quiet route. The dashboard clock showed it was past midnight when the rain started. Heavy drops pelted the windshield, and the only sound, besides the engine, was the splattering of water on glass. I was transporting furniture to a small town surrounded by a dense forest. The dark road didn't bother me. I was used to solitude. But as fatigue began to weigh on me, I decided to stop at a small gas station I spotted by the roadside. The place looked forgotten by time, with dim, flickering lights and old gas pumps. All I wanted in that moment was a cup of coffee and a little rest. I walked into the convenience store, but the place was empty. No attendant, no movement. I grabbed a coffee from an old machine and returned to the truck. As I got back into the cab, something felt off. The air was colder, heavy with a strange thickness. I looked at the passenger seat, which of course was empty. I shook my head, laughing at myself for being so easily spooked. I started the engine and returned to the road. But the feeling that something was wrong didn't go away. Instead, it seemed to intensify with every mile. As I drove, I began to notice small movements out of the corner of my eye. Something seemed to be in the passenger seat, or at least that's how it felt. Every time I glanced over quickly, I caught a glimpse of a shadow, a vague shape. But when I looked directly, there was nothing. The road stretched ahead, and the only sounds were the windshield wipers and the engine. But the discomfort grew within me. A few minutes later, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A faint breathing, so soft it could easily be mistaken for the sound of wind. But the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was there inside the cab, in the passenger seat. My heart started pounding. I tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks, that fatigue was affecting me more than I thought. But the breathing sound was there, constant, as if someone were sitting right next to me. I looked at the seat again, and for a split second, I saw a shadow sitting there, but when I blinked, it vanished. The discomfort was turning into outright fear. Then, I heard a whisper, soft and almost imperceptible. "You left me behind." The voice was faint, like someone speaking from a distance. The truck continued down the road, but my body was paralyzed with fear. The whisper repeated, this time more clearly, "You left me behind." My heart pounded in my chest. I looked at the passenger seat again, and for a brief moment, the shadow seemed to form again. The deserted road ahead stretched endlessly, and I fought the urge to pull over, but something told me that was a bad idea. The voice whispered again, now closer, almost in my ear, "You left me behind." The road seemed endless, and the presence beside me more tangible with each mile. The invisible breathing and the haunting whisper pushed me to the edge of insanity. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly they began to ache, while the voice persisted, "You shouldn't have left me." After what felt like an eternity, I saw the lights of a town in the distance. A momentary wave of relief washed over me, and the presence seemed to dissipate as I neared civilization. When I finally parked the truck in town, the cold sensation and the whisper disappeared. I climbed out, feeling my legs shaking. All I wanted was to get as far away as possible from that road and the sinister presence that had seemed to accompany me. After that night, I promised myself I'd never drive alone at night again. But the strangest thing is that sometimes, in the quiet of the cab, when I'm parked somewhere, I still hear that breathing. And sometimes, the whisper returns, always telling me I left it behind. The abandoned motel. Driving at night always had a calming effect on me. The empty road, the absolute silence, and a fresh breeze that seemed to clear away any worries. But that night, exhaustion was getting the best of me. I'd been on the road for hours and knew I had to stop before sleep crept up on me. That's when I spotted a sign flickering in the darkness, indicating a motel ahead. The old neon was dim, blinking erratically, and the building looked almost forgotten by time. But it was my only option. I pulled over and stepped out, feeling a strange chill in the night air. As I entered the lobby, a shiver ran down my spine. Everything inside was outdated, furniture covered in dust, and a heavy smell of mildew filled the air. Behind the counter stood an old man, his pale eyes blank and unblinking. He handed me a key without a word and watched me in eerie silence, as if he were part of the motel itself. I followed the hallway to the designated room. Like the rest of the motel, the room reeked of decay, peeling walls, stained carpet, and a damp smell that gave the place an unsettling feel. But I was too tired to care. I lay down, hoping sleep would come quickly. It didn't take long before I was startled awake by a sound in the hallway, soft, shuffling footsteps that stopped just outside my door. I thought it might be another guest, but then I heard it heavy breathing. It came from the hallway, right outside my door, the sound thick and unnerving, like someone was listening, waiting. I froze, unsure of what to do. The breathing continued, slow and heavy, each breath more threatening than the last. I wanted to open the door, but something deep within me warned me not to. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the silence returned, and the footsteps slowly retreated. I felt a brief relief, thinking that whatever was out there had gone. But then the doorknob began to turn, moving slowly, almost hesitantly, as if someone were trying to open the door quietly. My heart pounded as I watched the knob, and the door creaked open a crack, revealing the dark corridor beyond. No one was there, but the overwhelming feeling of an invisible presence was suffocating, like someone hiding in the shadows, watching me. For a moment, I was frozen, staring at the slightly open door. The room felt cloaked in a thick, oppressive atmosphere that kept me paralyzed. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, the sound reverberating through the room like thunder. I jumped out of bed, panic overtaken me. My instincts screamed at me to leave, not to look back. I grabbed my things and bolted down the empty corridor. Each step echoed strangely, reverberating as if I were running through an enormous, endless space. When I reached the lobby, the man behind the counter was gone, and the entire place was empty, as if he'd never been there at all. I wasted no time, running back to my truck, desperate to leave that place behind. I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, trying to steady my breathing. In the distance, the motel sign flickered, and for a moment I had the strange sense that it was calling me back, as if something in that motel wanted me to stay. I looked into the rearview mirror, watching as the motel faded into the distance. A sense of relief washed over me, and I let out a long sigh. That's when the air in the cab grew cold. A chill ran down my spine. Before I could fully grasp what was happening, I heard a heavy breathing, this time from the passenger seat, right beside me. The same breathing, slow and thick, that I'd heard outside the motel room door. I couldn't bring myself to look. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, heart pounding, as the breathing continued next to me. Somehow, I knew that presence had followed me. And in that moment, I realized that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. The trucker who never arrived. Life on the road always had its dark, lonely side, but for me, there was a certain charm to driving at night. The silence, the peace of an empty road, the feeling of being the only one moving through a world at rest. That night, however, everything felt a bit different. The air was heavy, and the darkness seemed thick, almost tangible. I was heading to a small town for a last-minute delivery, driving a route I knew well. As I rounded a sharp curve, I spotted an old truck up ahead. The paint was faded, and the lights flickered irregularly, like the vehicle was on its last breath. It moved slowly, and as I got closer, I noticed it wasn't driving straight, but weaving, drifting across the road. I decided to pass it as soon as I could. As I pulled alongside, I glanced into the cab, curious to see who was driving that strange truck, but the cab was empty. There was no one behind the wheel. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, maybe a side effect of the fatigue. I sped up, leaving that vehicle behind, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the truck again. This time it was closer, its lights flickering erratically as if it were following me. Fear took hold of me, and my heart raced. I pressed the gas, trying to put some distance between us, but the truck stayed close behind. Then the radio crackled, and a voice whispered, rising from the static, "You shouldn't be here." I looked in the mirror again, expecting to see something strange, but the truck had disappeared. The distant lights revealed only the empty, desolate road. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the feeling of being pursued didn't fade. I drove for what felt like an eternity, and the road itself seemed to change. It grew narrower, the curves became tighter, and the trees leaned in, as if the forest were trying to swallow me. Then, I saw a town up ahead, shrouded in thick fog. I felt a momentary relief as I approached, seeing the lights flickering in the distance. But as I entered the town, I knew something was wrong. The streets were empty, the houses closed tight, and the entire place was cloaked in a near-oppressive silence. Everything was dark, as if the town had been abandoned long ago. I parked in the central square and looked around, hoping to see some sign of life. Then, the radio crackled again, and the same voice whispered, "You should never have come." I stepped out of the truck, my legs trembling. The town was wrapped in mist and silence. Every window I passed seemed to hold something dark, as if the shadows inside each home were invisible eyes watching me. The sensation of being trapped in a place with no way out was overwhelming. I climbed back into the truck and tried to start the engine, but it failed. I tried again and again until the engine finally roared back to life. Without wasting a second, I sped off, fleeing that ghostly town. When I glanced in the mirror, a chill ran down my spine. The empty truck I'd passed earlier was back. Its lights flickered as it drew closer, inch by inch. The voice on the radio echoed one last time, with chilling clarity, "You're not going to make it." And in that moment, I understood that perhaps this road had no end. If you love mysteries and the supernatural, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Leave a like to support the work and share with friends who are into the supernatural. Your engagement keeps these secrets alive.